you just mentioned this, that I think you're a fan of, workplace dating
Yeah.
and getting to know people that you date in the real world, in a work setting. And I've heard you speak about the courtship of Bill and Melinda Gates. They're now divorced.
You're now divorced. Yeah.
The story, I thought it was an apt observation that was made when you learn about the details of that story, that, this was such a 90s courtship that would potentially not really fly. And in modern world, I think this is connected to the Me Too issues that we've talked about. What is the story about Bill and Melinda Gates, and what about it do you think is worth keeping in mind and maybe culturally bring back to some degree?
So to me, I mean, I'm going to give you the takeaway before I tell the story, but to me, it shows how, especially with workplace dating, it's going to be much easier for the woman to make the first move. Because it's more culturally acceptable. So the story of Bill and Melinda Gates, it comes courtesy of a podcast interview that Melinda Gates gave, I think, probably maybe 20 years ago, and it was the AOL Makers podcast. So, the AOL part probably dates it. Okay. So the interviewer asked Melinda how they first started dating in 1987, and she this was just a few months after she'd been hired as a product manager at Microsoft. And according to Melinda Gates, quote, he said, and I guess they had met at a company event, and he said, I was thinking that maybe we could go out. If you give me your phone number, maybe 2 weeks from tonight. That's what he said to her. And Melinda did what any self-respecting 1980s woman probably would have done back then, and she played hard to get. So, quote, this is a quote from Melinda. I said to him, 2 weeks from tonight, I have no idea what I'm doing 2 weeks from tonight. And I said, you're not spontaneous enough for me. Bill, however, this is just me reading what I wrote in the book. Bill, however, would not take no for an answer. And this is a quote from Melinda. Quote, it was really sweet, Melinda recalls. He called an hour later and said, is this spontaneous enough for you? Now, I have to say, when I first heard the story, in kind of as somebody who went to college in the 80s and dated in the 90s, it didn't sound so bad to me. And I know a woman my age who was at Microsoft at the time, and even though he might not look like Michael B. Jordan, Bill Gates was considered a catch. Let's put it this way, by the single women of Microsoft way back then. Okay, so he was in demand, and so to me, this story sounds kind of sweet and harmless, but I think that's just because of my old guy bias. What sounds sweet and harmless to me actually wasn't or isn't. What we have here is a guy, a CEO of a company, who wouldn't take no for an answer, who somebody who worked for him said no to going out on a date with him, and he called back an hour later to ask her again. Now, in her case, it's clear she was playing hard to get, and I guess all's well that ends well, but it's pretty clear why this kind of behavior would probably land him in a meeting with his general counsel today if it happened now. So I think, I'm not, I think this is the kind of story that is a story of the times, and I'm sure Bill and Melinda, during their happier days, probably repeated the story to friends all the time. And I actually do think these stories of how we meet are really important, and they can provide kind of a mortar, so to speak, to the relationship. And this is why I think dating people you actually meet in the real world is so important, because if you meet through an algorithm, you don't have these stories of destiny and fate that you can share and that become an important part of who you are and who you will become. But I guess, just back to your question, I do think the way they met back then would not fly today, and nor should it.
Yeah. You're right. It is a CEO technically speaking, it's a CEO calling up a subordinate, an executive who had declined his approach and asking again. And I'm wondering, what you think the right strategy there should have been, or for men who, have subordinates or just coworkers in general. How would you suggest in the modern climate that dance, be made?
Yeah. But both, like, I don't think of Silicon Valley companies as being pioneers in human resources, but I actually think both Google and Facebook have hit upon the perfect solution to this problem. And when it comes to workplace dating, both Facebook and Google, and I'm guessing probably other companies have followed suit, they have a policy that's basically you can ask anybody out on a date once, but only once. And any answer you get that's not yes is a no. So if Dan, if I ask you out on a date and you say, yeah, I'm busy on Friday, that's a no. And I could never ask you out again. And if I do ask you out again, I'm probably going to HR. So to me, this is a way of allowing the workplace romance to flourish. And I think it should, because the research shows that 25 to 30% of workplace couples end up marrying. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because if you date somebody you work with, you already know their character. I mean, you already know if your senses of humor mesh. You already know if they're a decent human being. Like somebody who is cruel or dishonest in the workplace, I guarantee you is going to be cruel and dishonest in a relationship. Yeah. And somebody who is caring and empathetic in the workplace is going to be that in a relationship. So I think you can learn a lot about people by working with them from 9 to 5 or 9 to 10, probably in Silicon Valley. So there's a lot of, to me, the workplace is a great place to meet somebody, but this policy that Google and Facebook have adopted it's a way of eliminating the pestering. So I'm sure if you're a woman at Google, you probably get asked it all the time, and but I'm sure it's a problem for some women. So if you don't say yes, at least you don't have to worry about the same guy coming back to you over and over and over again, because it's against company rules. So I think this is an HR policy that Silicon Valley may have right.
Do you think that's and you may have just answered this, but do you think that is the reasonable, rule of thumb and criteria?
I think it's a reasonable rule of thumb, but I also think it's much easier for the woman to make the first move. I mean, there are a couple of fantastic love stories that I share in Make Your Move. I'm not going to give away too much, but one of them, the woman, this was actually two people who I used to work with at a newspaper, and she wrote him a long love letter. And they're married with 2 kids today. So I think I think just it's easier for the woman to take that sort of a chance, because men are bigger and stronger and more physically intimidating. So sometimes if the come on is unwanted, it can be intimidating for a woman in a way that it probably is less likely, it's not impossible, but it's less likely to be for the man. And I also think men are just so not used to women making the first move that it becomes intoxicating for some men.